Just giving y'all a minute to get connected to audio. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces as well. Welcome, good afternoon, good morning to some of you. Thank you for being here. I'm Xiomara, and I would love to start with a quick introduction so we're not strangers. Before I do, just a note about how we do introductions just a little bit differently here at Promise 54. As opposed to introducing ourselves with the degrees we've earned or our credentials or our networks that we're a part of, we encourage radically human introductions. And what we mean by radically human introductions is that we start off relationships by revealing a few of the things that matter most to us, truly, that make us who we are or bring us to this work. And that could include our work or our degrees or our networks, but only if those really truly matter to us and make us who we are. And so my super short radically human introduction goes something like this. Again, my name is Xiomara. My pronouns are she and her. I identify in lots of ways, including as a cisgender, able-bodied Latina, a queer woman, a daughter, a little sister, a wife, a titi, a mother, and an aspiring warrior for racial justice. I come from a multi-ethnic household where I grew up watching my parents form understanding and connection across lines of difference. And for them, that was a big part of the definition of love. I am the daughter of two first-gen college graduates who went on to get their PhDs and together broke the intergenerational cycle of poverty for our family. I am a wife to an amazing woman who I've been with for 21 years. We've been illegally married for 9 years, legally married for 4. I'm a mother to a kind, brave, smart 9-year-old who questions everything and loves with abandon. And I'm the proud founder and CEO of Promise 54. In case you're just meeting Promise 54 today, I'll tell you just a little bit about us. We're a national nonprofit organization, and we exist in order to help other organizations to create environments where their adults can truly thrive. And we do that in a number of different ways. We do that through tailored one-on-one partnerships where we meet organizations where they are and help support them to drive their work forward right at the intersection of talent and culture and diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism work. We also do cohort experiences where we bring organizations together that are advancing similar priorities and help support them in that work. And we do national research like the research that we're going to talk about here today. We're here today to more deeply explore some of the findings of the Unrealized Impact 2.0 report. We released the first report in this series in 2017. It was based on data from 5,000 individuals and 200 organizations. And what we wanted to understand is, how is the ed sector doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And the results were sobering. They showed that we have a really long way to go. And this new 2.0 report that we just released a month ago includes data from 28,000 individuals and 500 organizations across the country. It's the largest study of its kind on diversity, equity, inclusion in the field of education. Unrealized Impact 2.0 represents a bold call to action for organizations to engage in the work of becoming diverse, inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist, because we do believe that's a precondition for social justice. Throughout the report, you'll see themes that really explore this key question: who gets to thrive in education sector organizations today? Or put another way, who experiences their organizations as diverse, inclusive, and equitable? And we see consistent trends that staff with historically marginalized identities most often report less positive experiences. When we look along lines of racial identity, we see that Black and multiracial staff are the least likely to experience their organizations as diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And Native American and Indigenous staff are the most likely to experience bias. When we look along lines of gender identity, we see that women are less likely than men to experience their orgs as diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and non-binary staff are less likely than women to experience their organizations as diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And that trend carries through to bias, where we see that women are more likely than men, and non-binary staff are the most likely gender identity category to experience bias. It holds true when we go to sexuality as well. We see that LGBTQIA+ staff are less likely to experience their organizations as diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and more likely to experience bias as compared with straight staff. And so oppression is at work at work. And that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm really thrilled to welcome three brilliant and incredibly accomplished leaders of color into the conversation to explore this idea and its relationship to their own experiences in this session today. Before I do those introductions, I want to mention just briefly that we do have Spanish translation available throughout the session today. So if that's something that's helpful for you, it's available for you. And if you need any help accessing it, just private chat one of us. You can chat me and I can help you out, or you can chat Lucerito or Luis or Unsuk, who are helping with the session today. So just chat any of us if you need help accessing the Spanish translation today. So quick introductions. First and foremost, I want to introduce Jean-Claude Brizard, who's currently the president and CEO of Digital Promise. Prior to this role, he served as a senior advisor and a deputy director at the Gates Foundation. Before that, he was the superintendent in both Rochester and Chicago. JC, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you got in late. Thanks for joining. And Tommy Chang currently consults in his practice called Leading with Equity and Innovation. And prior to this, he was the superintendent in Boston Public Schools. Tommy, thank you so much for being with us today, even from your sabbatical and not even in the United States at this moment. Thank you. And to engage them both in the conversation, Ami Eubanks has joined us. Ami is the founder and CEO of Braven. Before starting Braven, she served in a number of senior roles at Teach for America. Ami also served on our advisory panel for the Unrealized Impact 2.0 study and report. Ami, thank you for serving on our advisory panel. Thank you for leading this conversation. I'm going to hand it over to you, and perhaps you could start with you all introducing yourselves in whatever way feels most radically human to you. Ami, I think we might be having a little trouble hearing. I know you are in transit from one place to another. Can you try one more time? Oh, I think we lost you. Okay, Ami's going to probably reconnect. In the meantime, Jean-Claude and Tommy, maybe you can start off with your introductions. I would love to hand you the mic. JC, maybe you can go first, introduce yourself in whatever way is true and real to you, and then hand it over to Tommy, and I bet we get Ami back by then.
Good morning, everyone. I'll try to emulate the amazing way in which you introduce yourself. So Jean-Claude Brizard, my pronouns are he, him. I am a proud Afro-Caribbean. I just came back from the Caribbean early this morning in California. So it reminds me we are amazing places. I work hard to teach folks the history of my nation of birth, Haiti. I'm proud of my marriage to a white woman who is rabid about diversity and equity, especially after marrying me and having 3 brown boys and a brown girl. So she is rabid about that. I live P16. I have a child in 1st grade. I was in kindergarten before, and I have a child in the 3rd year of Loyola University in Chicago. So that colors my work, my perspective, in fact, it colors my North Star. I don't no longer think about reading and math proficiency as the North Star in education. Tommy?
Thank you, JC. I love this idea of radically human intro. So really happy to share with everyone. I see myself as an immigrant, a person of color and Asian American. As an immigrant of Taiwanese descent, I am a perpetual foreigner in this country. This idea that I will always be a foreigner was solidified my first day of school in America when I was punished by a PE teacher for failing to respond to a request that he made in English. That day left an indelible mark on my psyche and began a process of suppressing my cultural and linguistic identity because my parents and I thought at that time to be American, I needed to stop speaking my native tongues. Like other people of color, I grew up with my parents instilling a fear of authority in me. People with power, whether they were police officers, teachers, or people to be feared, to always comply, even in the face of unjust situations. Why? Because they understood my physical safety was primary and my emotional safety was second. And lastly, I claim the identity of Asian American because it is a term coined, it was a term coined by academics and activists in the second half of the 20th century for political self-determination and to support an anti-racist and anti-imperialistic agenda. We should not allow the legacy of Asian Americans working alongside other communities of color for collective impact and social justice to be erased, especially at this moment.
Whew, beautiful. Thank you both. Ami, I can see that you are back with us. Will you try to say something so we can see if we can hear you? Idea. I mean, if you're still connecting via video, maybe try calling in. That perhaps will help. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into the conversation. I feel like there's already so many fertile places we could go, literally just based on your intros. Thank you for such generous introductions. Maybe we'll start though with the data that I shared at the top of the session, which is just a small slice of the data from this robust Unrealized Impact 2.0 report. I'm wondering if there's anything in there that surprises you all. And if it does, what is it? If it doesn't, why doesn't it?
I mean, happy to jump in. Nothing surprising, frankly, but just really affirming everything I read. The one thing I maybe I've not been as privy or perhaps present to in a number of years was the way in which women are treated in the workforce versus men, white or person of color. So that was a bit surprising, a little bit surprising for me, especially when you're looking at white women versus white men. But overall, frankly, just completely affirming that when you see the kinds of challenges folks are dealing with. When I was at Gates, we were in a meeting once, and I said this to our leadership team, that if you're a person of color, man or woman, walk into a room at the foundation, you're not only navigating the strategy, but you're navigating the room itself too. So the cognitive load is so high on folks who are, again, women and folks of color that very often many of us are not present to that level of stress. Frankly, that so many of us are engaged in these kinds of environments.
Yeah, that's so true. I really appreciated that description of the cognitive load when you're in rooms where your identity isn't affirmed. I mean, the data doesn't surprise me. What we do work and live in a white heterosexual male framework. And I think what this speaks to is that, like, we've got to create cultures within organizations where everyone is affirmed, everyone is sustained, because if not, that cognitive load is so great that it's difficult for people to thrive and unleash the greatness within them. So I know the famous quote Peter Drucker always says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Like, we've as leaders need to think about that primary if we want to create the organizations we all hope for. So nope, nothing surprises me.
Yeah. One more layer. Something just triggered. It's also a memory that I think is important to talk about. Again, based on my own experience, for many years, when I was a teacher, when I was a principal, my goal was to teach my kids how to code switch. And I said, look, the judge book by its cover. Let me teach you how to navigate these kinds of environment. But the last 10 years or so, I've evolved maybe a bit in thinking about what is the role of the organization, what is the role of others, frankly, in creating the kinds of environment to really welcome the diversity of all. Not all of us need to speak Mackenzie to be able to survive in these kinds of environment, nor should we have to, frankly, right? So for a long time, I thought I had to change, to adapt, to navigate. But frankly, we've come to really understand the work that has to be done on the other side. And frankly, even in how we look at measures, moving measures from just looking at students to looking at, again, the systems measures that have to be sort of looked at to be changed to frankly be much more welcoming to a diversity of folks coming into these organizations.
And I wonder if we could maybe zoom in from the sector at large and what we're seeing across the sector in terms of the data to your own experiences in your organizations. And I know both of you have spent big chunks of your career at the helm of large and complex organizations, and you're at the top of the positional kind of power hierarchy, if you will. I'm curious, to what degree would you characterize those work environments that you came into as men of color, as white supremacy culture environments or heteronormative environments? How did you see that playing out with your own experiences or for your staff? Maybe we could start there.
Tommy, I defer to you.
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, I've really evolved and I want to say evolved in my thinking about white supremacy culture. And when I first looked at the framework, I was really conflicted with this idea of sense of urgency needing to be combated within our organization. Because when you look at data on almost everything, like how can you not have a sense of urgency to like act now? It's like, damn it, we just need to blow this whole thing up and start over, right? But with the best of intent, like I, like so many others, we fail to reconcile that structural racism was not built overnight. And so it's not going to be deconstructed overnight. And it was, you know, it is deeply ingrained and dismantle. It's so deeply ingrained. Dismantling of these inequities that exist in our schools and school systems are really better accomplished if leaders invest the time to allow others to lead, especially those who have historically been most marginalized, to partner with communities who are actually the ones impacted, and not to make artificial deadlines on when things need to be completed. And I can just name so many times where, as the leader, like you want to be Rambo, you want to go in and blow things up, but you realize like that doesn't create sustainable change. I think we're all aware of this belief in many Indigenous communities that the work we do today should be sustainable for 7 generations. And just pushing for quick change in school systems just often fails, or it's unsustainable. So it's better to slow down in order for change to be realized.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tommy, with everything Tommy said. There's so many personal experiences I can lean on. Let me just perhaps start with this one. When I was in Chicago as CEO, maybe a few months into the position, I was attending a TFA Gala in the city. It was really a beautiful event. Wendy was there sitting at the table, Wendy Kopp, and my wife was an alum, lots of pictures, etc. I was the keynote speaker for the gala, and this prominent businessman from Chicago, and he was introducing me to the podium. I didn't know he was going to be the one introducing me. The guy probably knew nothing about me. And the way he introduced me, I can see Wendy getting visibly angry. So was my wife. But, you know, it took me a minute to actually become present to what was actually happening. He was saying things like, this is our hope. This is our future, I hope. This is the guy who's going to save us, I hope. He just kept ending every statement with I hope. And took me a second to realize this guy had no faith in my ability, knew nothing about me, clearly didn't approve of me becoming CEO of the school system. No, frankly, it was his damn business to approve of my position, but took no time to understand my journey and who I was as a leader. This was not my first rodeo. For Christ's sake, I spent 22 years in New York City public schools, 4 years leading a system in Rochester, New York. So what began to happen very quickly was this, and what I'm afraid of for so many of us who are people of color, you begin to lose your confidence a little bit because this one white man is doing this thing to you. I had to do the self-talk. I said, don't listen. Your job is not going to prove him wrong in everything that he's actually trying to say. So I had to completely reset emotionally, not even look at my wife, not even look at Wendy. So I didn't get angry so I could focus on the talk I was going to make. It was then I began to realize that even though the board appointed me, the mayor appointed me, I knew what I was doing, lots of friends in the city of Chicago, I was going to have to work a hell of a lot harder to change some minds in the city. And again, even that's wrong too, because it wasn't my job to change people's minds. It was my job to educate young people, and that was the work. But still, you know, you need the machine to support some level of the effort that you have to do. And the question became for me, you know, how do I navigate all of this? And you begin to realize, and by the way, this juxtaposed to walking down the street and Afro-Caribbean, African-American black cab drivers opening the windows, screaming, yeah, so happy to see a black man in charge of Chicago public schools. So you're getting that on one end in the black community of Chicago or the brown community in Chicago, because I was having a wonderful time with the Mexican Americans in Chicago as well too. But then you're getting this from this one individual, and you begin to wonder, am I painting a picture for all who look like him? Clearly that wasn't right either. But at the same time, you begin to realize the amount of work I was going to have to do on both sides to navigate all of that. That adds to the stress. It adds to the challenge of the job. With the work of leading a school system, Tommy did in Boston, is hard enough. We're dealing with historical racism, historical, what I call balkanization of cities, right? I mean, Tommy, what about the Haitian Americans in Boston? You know, we can tell our stories about Haitian kids in Boston. So that in itself is very difficult enough. But when you personally have to fight that as well too, it just makes the work just that much more difficult.
Yeah. There's a lot of energy in the chat around this concept that y'all introduced, code switching. And I'm curious if you might share a little bit more, each of you, about how you would define that, how you saw it play out through moments of leadership in these contexts that you're talking about. Before you do, and as you think about that for just a second, I'm going to check and see if Ami is back with us. I think you might be. All right. So turning back to this question about code switching. So I think you all might be describing some experiences that perhaps you might point to in relation to that. And you started to talk about that concept. There's a lot of energy in the chat about it. Will you talk more about what that means to you? What were the ways in which you felt like you maybe needed to code switch in the context of your leadership? Were there places or times when you didn't? And what were the consequences or the results of that?
I mean, I'm happy to start since I introduced.
Yeah, why don't you start this one? Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Tommy. You know, it's something so many of us do unconsciously. We don't think about it. We just we learn to navigate, and we change the way we comport ourselves, the way we speak. I remember for a long time I lost my accent. At one point in my life, I developed a British accent. I don't know when it happened, but my Haitian Brooklyn accent came back with a vengeance, and I am not going to lose it for anybody. But it takes a level of and I think someone says here, you lose yourself. Many of us do it, but we lose our humanity in the process. It is so true. And I watch others, frankly, do it, from the way we dress to the way we do our hair to, frankly, to everything else. It's not just the way we speak, which again, so many of us do to navigate, to learn to assimilate. I mean, this country puts a lot of pressure on folks to assimilate, right? But in the process, you know, you blend in, you lose who you are. You know, I remembered when I was, maybe many years ago, I forgot what year, when the AIDS epidemic was rampant in the US, and they were blaming Haitians, for example, I guess carrying AIDS in this country, although, you know, the West brought AIDS to Haiti, but let's not go into that, right? I found family members and friends who were pretending to be Trinidadians and Jamaicans, so they would hide their identity and begin to speak, you know, like a Trini, right? Or like a Jamaican, and then they just completely lose their Haitian or Creole accent. But it takes a level of growth, maybe even self-awareness, and a level of hubris, frankly, you have to develop. I thought I had to develop my own self and identity to proudly say I'm from Haiti, especially given recent events in the country. Whenever that people email me and say, you know, I feel what's happening in Haiti, are you okay? I sent them one article that was written 10 years ago. So if you want to fix Haiti, look at history, not culture, or not nature. So being proud of that is something that I do often, but it takes a lot of self-talk, frankly, to be able to be who you are and dress the way you are and talk the way, frankly, you want to talk, and not to assimilate, to adapt to somebody else's culture.
JC, thanks for sharing that. I mean, your story so resonates with me. As I shared in my radical intro, these things start really young, especially as an immigrant. You're so pressured to assimilate. You know, I had experience going into Boston that really affirmed for me the importance of really understanding my own identity and being proud of it. Now, I had spent my entire career prior to that in Los Angeles. I was working in Black and Latino communities, and working in LA, never had I had my Black and Latino brothers and sisters ever question whether I was a person of color. It wasn't until I got to Boston where I actually was called white for the first time. And it was the most confusing thing to me. like Black and Latino communities would ask questions like, is he really going to push for more equity? Because after all, he is Asian. And conversely, white people would say to me, why do you care about studying the exam school policies? You know, they help your people. And I didn't have the language to combat that. And I wasn't clear enough in my own identity and being proud of who I was. And so it took a lot of, you said like self-talk, a lot of self-study, self-reflection. And just reminding myself, like I had this immense responsibility to shift the narrative that Asian Americans stand to benefit from systemic racism. And I had to work to combat attempts to pit Asian Americans against other communities of color. And so like being really proud of my own identity and my role was like, that took time. It took a lot of time to get there for me.
Thanks to both of you. I really appreciate the vulnerability on display, honestly, of both of you sharing these stories. I imagine it can be tough stuff to live through and to lead through, and then to share beyond that is really generous, so thank you. We talk a lot at Promise 54 about the concept of invisible labor and the extra burdens on staff of color, and I hear you both talking about that in these experiences in a variety of the stories you've already told, from the subtext and the subtext below that when you're being introduced at a gala as the keynote speaker, to the narratives pitting one group of color against another in moving to a new city. In your most recent story, Tommy, I wonder if you all have more to share around this concept of invisible labor and the extra burdens for staff of color in any role, from entry level to superintendent or CEO. What does that concept mean to you, and how have you been expected to take on burden or invisible labor in advancing DEI and racial justice work? What are some of your experiences around that beyond what you've shared?
Yeah, I can start this time. I agree this happens, and those who have been most historically impacted often take on that burden to explain their traumas and its effects. And DEI work it's been happening a lot in recent years, and there's a lot of investment in doing DEI work, but those who are responsible for it, and I'll speak from the perspective of a school system, that work is often relegated as like one department in a school system, led by one person of color, understaffed, and without a network of co-conspirators inside and outside the system. And that one person is expected to dismantle racism within a school system. And so I'm going to give like my beliefs about how it needs to act. What should we be doing differently? First, obviously, the work shouldn't be done by an individual. I think the work of individuals is to examine their own biases and their own lenses, to find resources to compensate for those lenses and biases, and to disrupt the effects of one's own biases. I think that's the individual, like we all have to do that work. I think it's also important that school systems and large organizations make a long-term commitment to this work. Like it cannot be like planning year in and year out. You actually have to draw out a 3 to 5 year plan for how you're going to do this work within a system. In BPS in Boston, we committed to cultural and linguistically sustaining practices as a topic of principal PD for 3 years. And we made cultural and linguistically sustaining practices the hallmark of the teaching and learning framework. And every school had to have a minimum of one culturally and linguistically sustaining practices goal in their accountability plan. Like this is a work of everybody. It cannot be the work of one load. And we did not do it perfectly. We had an office that had to be built up over years in order to have the resources necessary. But That's the work. It's long-term work. It's forever work.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Tommy. And as Tommy was speaking, I just kept thinking about, have I ever met someone who's in charge of DEI in any organization in the US or anywhere, I think, who was not a person of color? I've yet to find that. So it's always the Black person or the brown person, who is the head of DEI. To Tommy's point, that single individual, someone said this in the chat as well too, is responsible for systems change. So in my 4 years at the Gates, I became sort of obsessed with this idea of systems change. That was a big part of our effort in looking at places who are looking at this in comprehensively. When you look at all of the root causes, and as the Racial Equity Institute talks about, the groundwater underneath all of this, no single individual can change this. Why is that burden on one person? Do we say, well, you're in charge of academics, make sure every kid here learns everything in math and reading? It's never said that in any school system or anywhere for that matter, right? Yet you expect one person to come in and be that superwoman, superman, the savior is going to come in and change everybody and make them understand this. This is the work of all of us. We really need to understand these ideas of systems change, as FSG talks about the explicit and the implicit realms of systems change, and really understand what it takes to move systems along. It takes a lot of us. It takes every facet of of society or school. One person cannot do this, and as Tommy says, that person often is relegated to a junior position or less than position, not staffed, and then expected to do what needs to be done. If any of us are serious about this kind of work outside, we need to understand what it takes to actually change systems.
Yeah, thank you. And on this note of it really takes all of us, I want to zoom in and talk about white leaders. In particular, what's the responsibility that comes with racial privilege? What can co-conspiring look like? I wonder if you all have seen white leaders in the systems that you've led playing roles in particular that you can share that helped, that hurt. What can we learn from
7 to 8 a.m., 10 to 12, 5:30.
And just as a reminder, if y'all don't mind, just check your mute button. That would be great. Thank you.
From 2 to 4, which I absolutely have to be on point for.
Yeah.
I can't mess with.
Louis, are you able to just mute everyone for a second? We'll unmute. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, let's talk about white leaders and the role of co-conspiring. What have you seen work, not work, the responsibility that comes with racial privilege?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I've seen, to your question, I've seen both. And if I may start personal for a second, I am married to a white woman, and I've watched her, frankly, evolve over the many years. And the first person of color she ever dated. And her personal experience with me traveling, I think, is what began to help her understand the world I was living in. Of course, my experiences in Rochester and Chicago, and then now having brown boys of different shades of color and watching them treated differently has made her, frankly, rabid about this kind of work. So I watched that permeate her work. I've watched her, frankly, dive into what she does best, which is sort of read, understand, talk to people, watch the experiences. Even the strategy in her work at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, watch sort of evolve to really align with a kind of personal orientation. So what I've seen, for example, is when people take the time, and I've seen it frankly to do like Jen Cheatham when I worked with her in Chicago and others. She was in Madison now at Harvard. And again, maybe she's married to a Black man too, so that could be part of it. But when you see people take the time to really dig deep and go through a journey, get asked the hard questions and engage in those kinds of conversation, they become sort of really natural allies in this kind of effort. As a moderator for Pahara, I've seen that too in folks of color develop, again, through these kinds of really rigorous emotional conversations. I've seen others quickly where it doesn't help. And I've had folks who I've reported to, and I won't mention names, so I don't make headlines anymore, who just don't get it. And no matter how much you speak and sit with the individual, the journey is not sort of innate to what they are willing to do. So it comes across as superficial, they do things that actually hurt more than it actually helps. Sometimes they think they're doing something to help. Frankly, what they're doing instead is actually hurt people even more. Or they'll make comments like, "Wow, he's so articulate. Yeah, he has a PhD, and you know, he's leading a large school system in Massachusetts. Of course, he's articulate." So those kinds of comments you hear from people, even though they sometimes are well-meaning, can really be damaging. In my own perspective, one example where someone can make you feel stupid, right? What they're saying out loud, and you have to dig deep and emerge and pull yourself out of that. I think is the kind of psychological warfare so many of us are experiencing, right? And getting over physical warfare, I think, is difficult. Psychological warfare is insidious, and it's long term. I mean, look, you look at brown people and Black people across the world, what is often referred to as the global South. I mean, this is psychological warfare going on around the world, and this kind of pulling yourself. If I may give you one example, I just came back from the Caribbean. I won't mention the country specifically, but it's not just one I've seen across. Walking through the airports, there are pictures of people, in the billboards. And this is a Black country, right? It's all white women and men. And I'm saying myself, so if you're doing that, what is the subliminal message you're sending to the young people in this country? That they're not as beautiful, right? It's happening now. That kind of psychological sort of warfare, sometimes we do to ourselves, perfectly, we see it often done with other races. That needs to change. Otherwise, we're never going to emerge from this.
I've been blessed to work with white conspirators who've provided so much air cover to do great work. And I've also worked with obstructionists who claim they're for equity. But I'll keep it really simple. I think there are two things we need from our white colleagues. We need them to learn by listening and asking questions. Sometimes just pause and listen. And when they're ready to lend political capital, they have a lot more to spare. And so that's what I feel like we need from them.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to ask a little bit more about this idea of how you're managing the toll of that psychological warfare and the work that you've both talked about, and the toll that it takes on so many levels. How do you personally think about the balance between fighting the battles and your own mental health, your own well-being, your own sustainability, knowing that these are large systems that require long-term change and it's going to be a long-term battle? How do you think about when and how to lean in and when and how to lean out?
I'll jump in. As it was mentioned, I'm not in the US right now. I'm actually in Oaxaca, Mexico. I have spent the last 4 months in Latin America. One of my focuses over the last 4 months is to study and understand indigenous communities. I believe that there is wisdom that they have to offer, especially in this time in our global society. And for me, I'm learning. I'm still in a process. I'm learning about what I need for myself to be recentered. And when we are doing this work, I'm blessed to be able to do this right now, to be able to take a pause from like leadership. But as leaders within our organization, we are running on adrenaline all the time. We don't know what our body needs, our mind needs, because we're just going. And when you can actually take some time to pause and realize what you need to be centered and healthy, I'm going to be a better advocate for myself in the future. I will be able to say, this is what I need for me to continue doing this work. And because I can be a better advocate for myself, I think I'll be able to do the work more long-term.
Agree with Tommy. So let me give you maybe one quick story that that I think it has helped me. When I was in Rochester as a superintendent and Obama was elected, I got a call from the press asking for a statement. My first reaction was, that's nice, you know. When I grew up, my president was always black. My teachers were always black. My principal was black. I don't get the big deal. And I realized what I was saying. I said, don't print that. Let me give you a different quote. So what I'm getting at very simply is that the first 11 years of my life was in Haiti. I was able to see heroes who look like me, people in power who look like me, right? So you develop a sense of self and a sense of an opportunity ceiling that's unlimited, right? But having lived in the US for 40 plus years, I've come to internalize all of the microaggressions, the racism and everything else. And that self-talk is really, really critical. But having those first formative 11 years, I've been able to dig back into that and come out. But so many of us who've never had that kind of experience, and I've watched colleagues of mine who've gone to live in Ghana, for example, who've gone to live in other places, and they come back change because they've seen something different, where you experience much more classism than racism, right? And coming from a family of teachers, you know, I was never really poor. I never really grew up in poverty. I was never rich, but never grew up in poverty. So didn't experience the kind of classism. So, but that kind of psychological sort of well you can go back into has helped me. The other thing I find really is helpful is to talk when folks talk to you. As Tommy says, sometimes you are running on adrenaline that you don't take the time to step back and really process. And frankly, I really processed Chicago after I left Chicago. Now, if you want to talk Chicago, I said, I need a cocktail. Let's talk Chicago, right? But it took time for that to happen. But when you're in the middle of the arena, you tend to forget, and that can be frankly, psychologically sort of really bad and terrifying. And I've watched, by the way, one thing that we need to talk about, I've watched so many Black women or women of color in the superintendency who have died. You know, LA, Atlanta, Seattle, you know, Maria Goodlow is a dear friend and she died 52. This job is killing so many folks of color because of the kind of, frankly, mental health issue that we don't deal with, don't talk about. We've got to create space for people to do that, to be able to talk about the experiences and the stress, because the way I have learned you change things is by talking about it, which is what therapy is all about, right? So we don't have the time to go into therapy. We should, but I find, frankly, that opportunity to write about things, to talk about it, frankly, is a good way of processing. But as Tommy said, if we don't take the time to do that, it's going to continue to hurt us physically.
Thank you. Ooh, so meaningful, the examples of how you all are doing that, and also the reminders of the incredible importance of it, right? And the incredible toll and consequences at work and with life and with bodies. I want to maybe take this as a pivot point into one more tension that I know you all navigate all the time, which is one you've already referred to today and had some energy in the chat to hear a little bit more about, which is this idea of urgency. And you've kind of talked about it a little bit now too, right? Like the current realities in organizations across the sector are realities that involve real-time pain and trauma, real consequences to careers and to bodies and to lives. And therefore, there's a lot of urgency to move, to shift, to get to meaningful change in our organizations and across the sector. On the other hand, we've heard both of you talk about the idea that when you're trying to shift a system, sometimes that requires slowing down. Getting to organizational transformation requires getting enough people on board and moving to actually create change, sustainable, lasting change. And sometimes that requires slowing down. How do y'all think about this tension between the urgency to move quickly to address the fact that there's real-time pain and trauma being created, and on the other hand, slow down in order to get to meaningful, long-term, lasting, sustainable, transformational change?
I'm happy. I'll jump on this one. It's a great question, and it's a real tension. Let me just say that sometimes in the urgency, we can do more damage than good. So I have an old colleague of mine who used to often talk about moving at deliberate speed. I've come to adopt that term as well, because taking the time to fully understand before launching, I think is really, really critical, because again, you'll do more damage than good. And I can give so many examples too. And one I remembered from my days as a school principal was this child was constantly getting suspended. And of course, the gut reaction was, to fix the kid, call the parent and do all the stuff you see in the old playbook. When someone took the time to sit with this child and begin to talk to him, found out he couldn't read. And that was his way of sort of going after the problem. Of course, once you go deeper, there are all kinds of family issues or he was dealing with as well too. So when someone took the time and sit back and really understand the root causes of the behavior, then you can begin to address the issues. And that might take longer time. You can't just teach a kid to read. There's a lot of sort of other kinds of things happening in this child's life. So bottom line is, when you look at the systems, again, really taking the time to understand root causes, taking the time to understand what levers to pull. We deal with a very complex set of issues. Understanding the best levers to do the work and to do it deliberately, I think is important. Agree, we've got kids who are dying. We've got to move, but if you give the kid the wrong medicine, if you inject them with the wrong thing, you will kill them. You will not do any good, which is why it's important to move at this deliberate speed.
I agree. I think as leaders, our job isn't to like yell and scream and ask people to just follow you blindly. The work really is about building, like the urgency is around building the coalition. It's about building up others to lead. I think that's where the sense of urgency needs to be. And then as leaders of systems, our job is to then remove barriers where we can, and then to help celebrate wins, because that will build the momentum for the work to continue.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, one last question. You all are so very accomplished in your careers. You have been through a lot of life and a lot of leadership and a lot of lessons. And I'm curious, if only you'd known then what you know now, what would you share with up and coming leaders of color who are navigating an education sector that is currently, has been for a long time, majority white, serving a lot of Black and brown families and communities? What do you wish you'd known then that you know now that you could share with others?
I can jump in first this time. While I was an immigrant to this country, I basically grew up in the US. I went through the American education system. And so the first thing I would say to up and coming leaders is to tell them to learn about their ancestors. I think folks need to understand that they are descendants of incredible people. And that's important. I think JC spoke to that. I think the second thing is find a network of colleagues that can serve as thought partners and life jackets for you. When as I've gone through my career, early on, I think my ego really prevented me from getting into networks where I could learn from others and really just seek guidance. So number two, find a network of colleagues. And a third one is seek mentorship, especially from elders. You may need to find them, but if you dig deep within all systems, there are elders in these systems that will reveal themselves and will be there to be a sage for you. So I think those are three things I would say to young and upcoming leaders.
It's always good to let somebody else go first, because of course Tommy triggered a lot of things I would want to say. I often get the question, what would you tell your 17-year-old self or your 20-year-old self? I always find that very difficult to answer, because I am the sum of my experiences, and every experience, good or bad, has been a learning experience. As long as you learn from it to move to get better, I think is a critical thing to think about. But to Tommy's point, I would say maybe the most valuable thing I have had, you can go back to this idea of the sum of your experiences, is the networks you belong to, the mentors you seek out, the colleagues you seek. when I was in Chicago, for example, I had 3 people we talked with on a regular basis: Carmita, Evan Ruddle, and Dal Cobb. They were my kitchen cabinet. 3 of my folks from my Pahara cohort, and then we would sit and basically I could let my hair down and say whatever the hell I wanted to say, complain about what I complained. I knew I was going to get back to the mayor or anyone else. That was my network, and I wouldn't have had these 3 folks, frankly, if it wasn't for my Pahara experience. The other, frankly, people like John Daisy and others at Broad. I had a very good Broad colleagues. They run the gamut as well too, right? From small city superintendents or folks who never went to become a superintendent, to folks who again were admirals in the Navy. But these folks have always been great counsel for me. So whenever I had an issue and I was stuck with a particular very difficult situation, I would call and have a session, right? And that was the most valuable experience. But frankly, the person I would give the most to, 2 of them, is Tom Payson and Arlene Ackerman. Again, don't have to agree with everything they did or who they are, but they amazing experience, folks. And they were the ones. Arlene would come in, and Laura Shrum, can't forget Laura, and Garden Grove. Laura would come to Rochester. We said we have dinner. And those kinds of experiences were invaluable, frankly, in helping you navigate just quickly. And Arlene asked me once when I was going to Rochester, because every city has one metric by which it measures success. And don't tell me it's your damn reading scores, because no one gives you a damn about your reading scores but you. What is it? It took a while to dig, but we found was the graduation rate. She goes, okay, make sure that goes up. You can burn the place down, get to the real root causes of the issues. You'll have time to do the work you need to get done. So that stayed with me and helped us really understand what we had to do and bypass and get the political capital we had to gain, frankly, to do our work.
Tommy, Jean-Claude, I am in no way surprised whatsoever, but in all ways inspired. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and sharing so generously your leadership and your perspectives and your thoughts and your stories. Thank you so much. We all get to benefit from that. Just a couple of quick closing notes for you all before we head off. First and foremost, I want to invite you all to stay engaged with us throughout the month of November. Today marks the first of a 9-part, completely free and totally available to anyone webinar series where we'll be talking with over 40 different leaders from across the field, like Jean-Claude and Tommy, who kicked it off with us today, about lots of different aspects from the Unrealized Impact 2.0 report. So we're taking a break tomorrow to encourage folks to get out and vote. And then on Wednesday, we'll be back with a session on anti-Blackness, and we'll go funders on Thursday and continue on for the next 2 weeks, 3 sessions a week. Information is there in front of you and also in the chat. If you are an organization that is in need of support right now to, excuse me, advance your diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I want to encourage you to explore the Promise 54 DEI Accelerator. It's one of our cohort programs that we offer to help support organizations to advance their work. And we are accepting applications right now. So if that's something you could benefit from, reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you and give you more information. And last but really importantly, I want to take a minute to thank you to our co-sponsoring organization, EdLock, for this, for their support of today's session. I told Sharonda, their current CEO, that I would thank you all for coming on her behalf. She couldn't be with us today because today marks the 1 year since Laila Avila, their fearless founding CEO and leader, passed away. She was a dear friend to many of us and an incredible leader. I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge this important day and appreciate her brilliance and her incredible impact on so many of us and the field at large. So thank you to EdLock for the co-sponsorship. Please take a moment today in whatever way feels right to you if you knew Laila and her work to appreciate her impact on the world while she was with us, albeit way too short. And lastly, I want to encourage you to take just a minute to let us know what you made of today's session. We have a very, very quick 2-minute survey form that will give you an opportunity to tell us what worked for you, what you might want to see refined or shifted in future webinars. And we pour through that feedback and use it to inform all of our offerings in the field. So please take just a minute, this last minute, to click on into that survey form and fill that out for us and tell us how your experience was today. Thank you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you soon.